Go.
Hello there, it's Dr. Carla Marie Manley here with Dr. Shelley Davidow. We are inviting you to join us on a journey, women to women, where we'll talk as real women about real topics. But before we really start getting into daily talks, weekly talks about what's most important to you in your life, let me just introduce you to Shelley. And Shelley is Shelley, you tell the world about you.
Yeah, I'm a lecturer in curriculum and pedagogy at the School of Education at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia. So a world away from you, Carla. And I teach teachers, and I'm also an author. So I have a secret life, and I write about everything. I'm across genres, so from children's books to non-fiction, self-help to fiction, all of those kinds of things. And what about you, Carla?
Before we go to me, show me your new book, please.
Oh, all right. I'll show you mine if you show me yours. All right.
Okay, it's a deal.
Here it is. This is Fail Brilliantly, and yes, the F is supposed to be the wrong way round. And yes,
I love it.
wheels of the bicycle are square. So yeah, that's the new book from Familius. That's what you and I have in common, right? We're both Familius authors.
These authors. And so,
Yes.
you showed me yours. Here's mine. Mine is Joy from Fear. And this is it. This is my baby. And so we've talked about Joy from Fear in our last interview. So let's take the time today to focus on you. I'd really like to hear more about you, about your story, and what brought you to write a beautiful book. I just love the cover, just love it. And what brought you to write Fail Brilliantly?
Yeah, great question, Carla. I suppose a lifetime of failing. I just felt like if I'm an expert in one thing, it's complete failure. And I'll tell you why. People often only see the results of your endeavors. They don't see the journeys. So people look at me and they say, oh, you've published all these books, you're a success. But actually, financially, I'm not a success at all. And every book pretty much has, some have done fairly well, but some have not. And in my own life, I grew up in South Africa during apartheid in a family that was both black and white. So I had an adopted black sister, and this was illegal at the time. So there was a lot of fear around me and in my life. My parents were very courageous. They were social entrepreneurs. My mother was in war-torn townships every day, starting little schools with her black colleagues, and just amazingly courageous. And I felt like the terrified member of the family who was just going, is this normal? Is this okay? Like, can you guys sleep at night when you know that, there are break-ins every night and people are being, murdered and raped? Can you sleep? But, I was sort of seen as overreactive. Even though these things were happening, I definitely had an overactive stress response to everything. So I was a very frightened child, and I was a very frightened young adult. And I, like you, Carla, became anorexic at around the age of 14 or so, and starved myself, till my hair fell out, my period stopped. And I thought I was doing a good thing because I felt like it was the one thing that I could master, that I could control. No one could make me eat. And it was sort of fed by, living on a continent where 90% of your generation are actually starving. I thought, why should I be this spoiled, fat white girl? That was kind of my rationale. So I felt like it was a good thing to not eat. But yeah, of course, then eventually you carry on long enough and then you die. And I actually didn't want to die. So stories of failure and fear were very much stories of my life. I had to get out of Africa, and it has taken me probably 25 years to find a really stable life. And along that journey, there have been so many failures. I've lived on 5 continents, so I've actually failed to make it on 5 continents. And I finally I've made it, and it was through luck, but also sheer hard work. And the most profoundly changing moment of my life was when I was living in America. I was 33 years old, and I was diagnosed with a pituitary tumor right in the middle of my head, which wrecked the vision in my left eye. And when your body fails you, there's not a lot you can do. And I think, though no one has told me, I think that the anorexia had something to do with the tumor, because it messes with the whole endocrine system when you starve yourself. So I don't think these stories are not related. So I think, your emotions become your body becomes your thought process. Everything is interrelated. And so when that happened, I realized that I was so in fear that it was almost my fear that was going to kill me. And my one objective, aside from getting better, was to overcome fear. And so I would say that the roots for the book, Fail Brilliantly, were born in my overcoming that sense of, oh my gosh, my body's failed me. So in the book, I look at failure in three particular ways, because all failures, in my opinion, are not created equal. In fact, the idea of personal failure only came into our consciousness in the 1800s. Before that, the word failure meant to not arrive at a destination in English. And then in the 1800s, it was like, oh, that person is a failure. That person hasn't done what they set out to do. And so the idea of personal failure and personal success evolved. So after feeling like my body was failing me, I thought, okay, there are three kinds of failures. First degree failures are things where actually terrible things happen. People die, planes don't arrive at their destination, the Titanic sinks, those kinds of failures. That's a first degree failure. You can't get back from that, and your only way of dealing with that is to learn how to manage enormous loss and tragedy. So that's, my definition of first degree failures. Second degree failures are failures where you set out on a mission, and it could be an emotional journey or a physical one, like you try to reach the moon and you don't get there, but you get back, or you get somewhere else, or you survive, but you don't get anywhere where you were planning to go. And those failures are, pretty much most of life. You try go somewhere and life pushes you somewhere else. And dealing with those failures is really, they're not failures, they're just unexpected outcomes. So I wanted to look at failure as, okay, there are some things where definitely stuff fails, but second degree failures are just unexpected outcomes. Why can't we just say, hey, I wanted to get that A grade, but I got a D instead, and that's unexpected, but what do I do with that? Because life is going to be full of those. And then third degree failures are the failures that we make for ourselves. Like we decide, for example, as educators, that an A is this and an F is this, an F grade is this. And if you get below that, 40%, you fail. And then you become a failure. But we actually have created the paradigm for those failures. And those, we can just do away with those if we want, because we make them, so we can just undo them. We don't have to see ourselves as failures because we failed to get a number, or we failed to make, get the job that we wanted, or get to a certain point by 40 or by 50 or whatever. So third degree failures, we can just do away with those. So now that we've done away with second and third degree failures, really the only things that deserve our, or need us to really confront them are those first degree failures where things, are devastating. Mm-hmm. And so by putting failure into those three categories, I felt like I could manage so much about my life that was unexpected, difficult, trying to get residence in so many countries. I have had a green card, lost a green card, had British residence, lost British residence, had New Zealand residence, lost New Zealand residence. I am just a series of failed endeavors. And so, and recovering, for example, from a tumor in my head was, for me, the deepest kind of success. That really was my joy from fear, as you might have, guessed. That's where I thought, well, if I lose my life, then I lose everything. But if I can just postpone my end date as long as possible, that is success. So, this whole idea of, success and failure, or surviving or not surviving. None of us actually survived. That was my most comforting thought when I was sick, It's complete illusion, like survival and a cure and all those words. All we can do is live as long a life as possible, postpone an inevitable death, and confront our deepest fears. And my deepest fear was my own vanishing, like not being there for my son, or not fulfilling the things that I wanted to fulfill. And I guess that's the story, Carla, behind Fail Brilliantly. And so, the book offers all kinds of tools and tips for dealing with these three kinds of failures, and also looks at, the philosophy of failure. Do we even have to think of life in terms of success and failure? Because every time we think of a goal, we caught the idea of failure or not reaching the goal. And what if we just went on a journey and said, well, let's see where we get to and what we find along the way? Would that relieve us of stress and fear? So,
beautiful way of looking at it. So I'm curious, when you say you failed on 5 continents, right? So those wouldn't really be failures then. They would be successes.
Yeah, they would just be unexpected outcomes, because I tried to live in all these places, and mostly for financial reasons and then for health reasons, it didn't work out. But then it led me to things that are precious to me, like journeys that I treasure. And, I suppose I would never have asked for this or predicted it. But in retrospect, I'm just so grateful for every one of these so-called failures, because no, it wasn't what I expected and it wasn't what I aimed for, but look where it pushed me. Yeah.
So it's in a way succeed brilliantly as well.
Yeah, exactly. And redefine that word, if you fail brilliantly, that's awesome. I feel like I've done it. I've classically failed.
So if I'm hearing you right, you really like to embrace the word failure, but you're redefining it so that it's more how it was understood before the 1800s, where it was just you didn't get at your destination.
Yeah, absolutely. To see both. Like, yes, there are real failures indeed, like there are. I think when planes don't arrive at their destination, that is a real failure.
Yeah.
And those are real. We can't get things back. And so we have to cope with the loss or the failure of that to happen. But then the other ones that are mostly to do with life, or the things that we make, the decisions we make, we don't have to call that failure, or we can just go, well, when we do fail in that sense, brilliant, move on, next,
Just love it. It is such an empowering way of looking at life.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
There are so many of my clients who have, here's a theme, I must be perfect, right? I must succeed. And if they don't get to what they have or somebody else has in mind as the ideal result, they feel like a failure. And that follows them, in their head, in their heart, for often, years until they heal from it. And so this would be a way of looking at that and saying, wait, it's just a different outcome.
Yes, that you're absolutely right. And I don't know, have you read the neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky? He wrote Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, or Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers.
No, I haven't. It sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it's a great book. Pitch for Robert over here. It's a wonderful book, but what I gained from that book, he talks about stress, and stress and working with stress is a big part of my life and the professional development that I run for teachers and for kids. But he talks about zebras and how, they eat grass, and then a lion comes along, and then they're terrified and they run for their lives. And then if they don't get eaten, they just go back to eating grass. They don't develop these complex theories of like, oh my goodness, what if, I would have been eaten, and what would my children have done? And they just, they carry on eating grass. And so they're not stressed until the next lion comes along. And so I love that image of, just going back to what you're doing. Not that we can not be thinking like complex human beings, because we are, but just that thing of like not letting the stress or the fear become chronic in us. And when we feel like failures, Robert Sapolsky also says in that book, he talks about primates in Africa and how those baboons or apes who feel subordinate, who feel like failures, live shorter lives. So it's not whether they actually, get the banana. It's whether they feel harassed, picked on, subordinate, less than, and they feel bullied and they feel small and unsuccessful. That's the predictor of higher stress levels, more glucocorticoids in their systems, and they just don't thrive. And so that became a really interesting sort of inspiration for me. And I just thought, yeah, feeling like a failure is so bad for our bodies that I just can't afford to do that. So I'm not going to do it. So anything that I can do to not take that into my cells and into my physiology, I'm going to do. And I don't know if that picture is helpful for people, but it was for me to just say, I'm not going to take that on because I don't want to, impact my health and my possibility of living a long, happy life.
And you are so right. And there's such beautiful research out there on what stress does to the body, right? On a cellular level. And it's interesting because sometimes people, when I talk to them about the importance of doing it for their physical health, their mental health. And it's like, okay, yeah, whatever. And then I say, well, it will also decrease belly fat. And they're like, oh, really? And then they get excited about that because, lower levels of cortisol, reduced belly fat, that sort of thing. So if nothing else, living a stress-free life, of course, improves relationships and improves your overall sense of joy throughout each day, which the idea, and I think we have the meeting of minds on this, the idea is to create more joy.
Yeah.
Create more joy by facing one's fears, the possible outcomes, looking that just because it's different, and I love this because just because it's different doesn't mean it's bad. Just because it's a different outcome doesn't mean that it's not possibly a better outcome or the outcome that was meant to be. And that seems like that's a huge part of your message.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the whole thing, is that when I look back at all my struggles, I wouldn't give them away for anything. So isn't that weird? I didn't want them, but now I wouldn't trade them, because the tools that I got are mine forever. So the strengths that I got, they're really mine. I own them. I can use them anytime. They're highly transferable.
Yes.
Those are the kinds of things. So yeah, that's it, Carla. I think.
Oh, that's beautiful. And for listeners, the piece that I really love about what Shelley just said is that life gives us traumas. Life gives us challenges. It's part of the journey. And what can we do with that? And this is a link, that Shelley and I share, that the learning that each challenge, somewhere in it, are lessons. And that if we spend our time blaming or wishing it had been different or shoulding ourselves or living in regret, that's not helpful for us. Yeah. What is helpful for us to look at the situation, see where the lessons are, which sometimes takes time or someone to talk to help you figure it out. And then, and I love how you said this, Shelley, the skills are highly transferable. They then are Shelley's, they then are yours to carry with you. And each time you do that, even if you don't do it perfectly in each situation, you're that much stronger, that much more aware for the next little challenge life brings.
That's so great. So I would love to talk to you next time about just joy and success from fear and failure, because I think that's what we want. That's what we want for our lives.
Absolutely. And we'll make a note of that, so we'll pick up from there next time. Thank you for joining us. It is our joy to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carla.
Thank you, Shelley. It's so much fun.
Yay.